My phone was almost dead. That was the first thing I noticed when I woke up in the recovery room, the little red battery icon blinking in the corner of the screen, like it was trying to warn me about something other than itself. I'd had the knee replacement done at St. Maurice, Augustine Medical Center in Columbus, 3 hours from home. My orthopedic surgeon there was one of only 2 in the state doing the minimally invasive procedure my insurance would cover, so that's where I went. I'd planned it all out months in advance, scheduled the surgery for a Thursday, arranged for my son to drive up Friday morning once I was stable, figured I'd be home by early afternoon. Simple, clean, considerate of everyone's time. That's the kind of woman I've always been. 63 years old and still arranging my needs around everyone else's schedule like I owe the world an apology for existing. I typed into the family group chat, the one my son created 2 Christmases ago that still had the name Whitlock Family E, because nobody ever changed it. There were 4 of us in there. My son, his wife Renata, my daughter-in-law's mother, for some reason I never understood, and me. Good morning. Surgery went well. They say I can be discharged by noon. Flight isn't an option with the brace. Could someone drive up to get me? I'm at St. Leiden, Augustine, Columbus, room 214. I set the phone down on the tray table and watched the ceiling tiles. There were 47 of them in my section of the room. I counted twice. The first reply came from Renata 40 minutes later. Oh gosh, Bev, we totally forgot that was today. Nathan has his conference thing and I have the Hendersons closing at 2. Have you tried Uber? They have XL options that fit medical equipment, I think. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, the way you do when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something that makes more sense. My son Nathan's reply came 6 minutes after that. Mom, why didn't you remind us this week? We talked about this. You can't just expect people to drop everything. Uber is fine. They have accessibility vehicles. I want to tell you that I fired back something sharp and deserving. I want to tell you I reminded him that I had, in fact, texted him Tuesday night, and that he'd responded with a thumbs up emoji. I want to tell you I mentioned that I was lying in a hospital bed 8 hours after someone had sawed through my femur, that the anesthesia had barely worn off, that my mouth tasted like copper and antiseptic and I couldn't feel my left leg properly yet. Instead I typed, okay. Just that. 1 word, with a period. Then I plugged my phone into the bedside charger and stared at the ceiling again. The discharge nurse, a young woman named Portia with box braids and the efficient kindness of someone who had seen everything, came in around 11:30 to go over my aftercare instructions. Crutches for 6 weeks. Elevation. Ice packs 20 minutes on, 20 off. A follow-up with my regular doctor in 2 weeks. No driving for 8 weeks. She paused at that last one. Do you have someone picking you up today, Mrs. Calloway? I'm working on it, I said. She gave me a look that was professionally neutral and personally concerned. We can't release you without confirmed transportation. I understand. I smiled the smile I perfected over 40 years of teaching middle school. Pleasant, unrattled, in complete control. Give me a few minutes. I called my neighbor Junie first. Voicemail. I called my friend Patricia from church. She answered on the 3rd ring, breathless, and told me she was in Pittsburgh visiting her sister. She'd completely lost track of my surgery date. She felt terrible. Was I okay? I told her I was fine. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at a name I hadn't called in almost 2 years. Griffin Alderman. His mother, Frances, had been in my 8th grade English class 31 years ago. She was one of those students who made teaching feel like the point of everything, curious and sharp and kind in the way that some 13-year-olds are before the world teaches them not to be. We'd stayed loosely in touch over the years, Christmas cards and the occasional Facebook comment. She passed away from ovarian cancer 4 years ago, and Griffin had called me then, out of nowhere, because he'd found my name in her address book, and he said she'd talked about me more than once, and he just wanted me to know. We'd had a real conversation that day, the kind you don't expect from a stranger. He told me she used to read her old essays aloud to him, the ones I'd written comments on in red pen. He said she kept them in a shoebox. After that, we'd exchanged numbers. texted occasionally. I wasn't sure why I'd kept him in my contacts, except that grief makes you hold on to certain things without knowing why. He was an attorney. I knew that much. Family law, I thought, or maybe estate planning. I couldn't remember exactly. What I remembered was that he lived somewhere in central Ohio and that he had his mother's way of making you feel like whatever you were saying was worth listening to. I stared at his name for a long moment. Then I pressed call, fully expecting voicemail. He picked up on the second ring. Mrs. Calloway. His voice was warm, slightly surprised. Everything okay? I almost hung up. I want to be honest about that. There was a moment where the embarrassment of what I was about to ask rose up so fast, I nearly disconnected and called a cab instead. Griffin, I said. I'm so sorry to bother you. I had a surgery yesterday in Columbus, and I've run into a bit of a transportation situation getting home to Dayton. I know this is completely out of nowhere, and please say no if it's any trouble at all. I can figure something else out. Where are you exactly? Sank quote. Augustine Medical Center, room 214. But truly, if you're busy, I'll be there in 40 minutes. The line went quiet, and I sat there holding the phone, feeling something complicated and warm move to my chest that had nothing to do with the anesthesia. He was there in 38 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. He was taller than I'd expected. I'd only ever seen photos, with his mother's same dark eyes and an easy, unhurried way of moving that made the small hospital room feel calmer the moment he stepped into it. He was wearing a jacket over a collared shirt, like he'd come from somewhere and hadn't stopped to change, and he carried a paper bag from a deli down the street. Figured you probably hadn't eaten much, he said, setting it on the tray table. Turkey on sourdough, no mustard, I guessed. I looked at the sandwich and felt, absurdly, like I might cry. I didn't. 40 years of middle schoolers will teach you how to hold a feeling in place until you're somewhere private enough to let it go. Portia came back to do the discharge paperwork, and I watched her take in Griffin. The jacket, the way he asked clear and informed questions about my medication schedule and physical therapy timeline, the way he wrote everything down in his phone, and I saw her relax in that way healthcare workers do when they believe someone is actually going to be taken care of. The drive home took just over 2.5 hours because we stopped once so I could use the restroom and stretch my leg. Griffin found a gas station with a bench outside and stood at a considerate distance, while I managed the crutches, close enough to catch me if I stumbled, far enough to preserve my dignity. It was a small thing. It mattered enormously. We talked. That surprised me too, how easy it was to talk. He told me about a case he was working, a family trust dispute, the kind that reveals exactly who people become when money enters the room. I told him about my 38 years teaching and the year I almost quit, but didn't, because a student brought me a handwritten letter on the last day of school that said I was the first teacher who made him feel like his ideas were worth something. Mom used to say that about you, Griffin said, eyes on the road, that you made her feel like her ideas mattered. I looked out the window at the flat Ohio farmland blurring past and let that sit inside me for a moment. We were 40 minutes from Dayton when my phone started ringing. Nathan. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Then Renata. Then Nathan again. I turned the screen face down on my knee. You don't have to answer, Griffin said simply. He didn't ask who it was. I know, I said. By the time we pulled into my driveway on Sycamore Glen Drive, I had 23 missed calls. Griffin helped me inside, got me settled on the couch with my leg elevated the way Portia had shown him, checked that the ice packs were in the freezer, and made sure I had everything I needed within arm's reach: remote, water, phone charger. The small bell I use to call my cat Biscuit, who comes when he hears it and for no other reason. I can stay for a bit, he offered, or I can go. Whatever you need. You've already done so much. He smiled. It was his mother's smile too, I realized. She would have wanted someone to look after you. After he left, I sat in the quiet of my living room and listened to my voicemails. Nathan's first message was frustrated. Why wasn't I answering? Who was this Griffin person? His number had shown up on the family location app because apparently Renata had added me to it without asking 18 months ago, and they'd been watching my phone move from Columbus to Dayton all afternoon. Who was he? The second message was different in tone, more careful. Dad was Griffin Alderman, the Griffin Alderman, the one who'd won the Beaumont Trust case last year that was all over the legal news. I didn't know anything about the Beaumont Trust case. I looked it up later. It was apparently a significant probate matter involving a family estate worth several $1,000,000. Griffin had represented the surviving spouse. He'd won comprehensively. Nathan's third message was almost gentle. Mom, call me back when you get a chance. I feel bad about this morning. I think we handled it wrong. Maybe we could talk this week? Renata and I could drive out Saturday. We could bring dinner. I set the phone down and looked at Biscuit, who had arranged himself on the arm of the couch with the serene indifference of someone who has witnessed everything and judged none of it. They want to come Saturday, I told him. He blinked once very slowly. I'd spent a long time after my husband Ray passed 8 years ago now, a heart attack at 61. The kind of sudden that leaves you standing in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, not understanding what has just happened to your life. I'd spent a long time trying to make myself small enough to still be wanted, rearranging my needs, apologizing for my schedule, asking instead of expecting, suggesting instead of stating, grateful for every scrap of presents my son offered because he was what I had left, and the fear of losing that too was something I carried in my chest every single day. That's not something you talk about, the loneliness of a parent who is afraid of their own child's indifference. It sounds like something you shouldn't admit. But I'm 63 years old and I've just had my knee replaced and I spent 6 hours alone in a hospital because the people who share my last name forgot I was there, and I think I've earned the right to say it plainly. Griffin texted that evening to make sure I was settled. I thanked him. He said his mother would have been glad he could help. I said I thought she would have helped someone too if it had been the other way around. He said yes. She absolutely would have. He asked if he could check in the next day. I said that would be nice. He did. And the day after that. And the one after that. At first it was practical. Was I doing my PT exercises? Had I called in the prescription refill? Was I eating properly? Then it became other things. A podcast he thought I'd like about a woman who'd hiked the Appalachian Trail at 67. A question about whether I'd read Marilynne Robinson. A story about a client's cat that had somehow gotten locked in a courthouse bathroom for 4 hours and nobody could figure out how. I laughed at that story more than I'd laughed at anything in a long time. Nathan and Renata came on Saturday as promised. They brought Thai food from a restaurant they knew I liked, and a card that Renata had clearly purchased from the grocery store that morning given the slight cellophane crinkle still on it. Nathan hugged me longer than usual. I let him. We sat in the living room with the food containers open on the coffee table, and Nathan said, eventually, in the practiced, casual tone he uses when he's actually nervous, "So this Griffin guy, he's a family law attorney, right? Like estate planning and stuff." "Among other things," I said. "How long have you known him?" "A while," I said. "His mother was a former student. She passed a few years ago. Renata was arranging her Pad CU with great concentration. It's just, we didn't know you knew anyone like that. We were surprised." "Were you?" I said. Nathan looked at me. "Mom." "I'm not angry," I said, which was true. I'd moved past angry somewhere around the second day of ice packs and PT exercises, and Griffin asking me if I'd ever read Gilead. "I'm just clarifying some things for myself." "We should have come," he said. "Yes, I know that." "Good." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was the kind of silence that happens when something real has been said and nobody is quite ready to move past it into comfortable conversation yet. I've learned to let those silences stay as long as they need to. Renata asked delicately whether Griffin and I were. She trailed off and made a small gesture that encompassed the general concept. "We're friends," I said. "He's 20 years younger than me. We're friends who enjoy talking." "Oh," she said. "Right. Of course." But what I didn't say, what I was still working out for myself, sitting on my own couch in my own house that I have maintained entirely on my own for 8 years, was that it didn't entirely matter what label I put on it. Something had shifted in me. Not because of Griffin specifically, though he had been unexpectedly kind, but because of the moment in that hospital room when I looked at my phone and thought, I need to call someone who will actually come, and I had known, without question, that person was not my son. That knowledge is a hard thing to carry, but it's also, in some strange way, a clarifying one. I made some decisions quietly in the weeks that followed, the way I've always made my important decisions, without announcement, without drama. I called my attorney and had a conversation about my will. Ray and I had set it up years ago, leaving everything to Nathan. I didn't remove him, but I adjusted things. A portion goes directly into a trust for my granddaughter, Lily, Nathan's daughter, 8 years old, and the one person in that family who had texted me a voice memo the morning of my surgery that just said, "Good luck, Grandma. I hope your knee feels better. I love you," in the earnest, slightly lisping voice of someone who has lost 2 front teeth and doesn't yet know that love is supposed to be complicated. That trust vests when she turns 22, after she's finished college if she goes, or at 25 if she doesn't. She can use it however she needs. Nathan doesn't know the specifics. He doesn't need to. It's not a punishment. I want to be clear about that, the same way I was clear with my attorney. It's a recognition that the people who show up for you and the people who share your blood are sometimes different people, and that the ones who can't make it to Columbus on a Friday don't necessarily need to inherit everything you've spent a lifetime building. Griffin and I have dinner most Thursdays now, sometimes at his place in German Village. He makes a very good roasted chicken, which I did not expect from a litigator, and sometimes at mine. We talk about books and his cases and my old students and the news and whatever Biscuit has destroyed most recently. A beloved succulent, a phone charger, one complete leather glove with no sign of its pair. I don't know what it is. I don't particularly need to know right now. What I know is that when I'm with him, I feel like a person with a full interior life, which is not always how I felt in recent years. Nathan and I we're in process. That's the honest way to say it. He's trying and I can see that he's trying, and I love him the way you love someone who is genuinely flawed and genuinely yours, but I've stopped rearranging myself to make it easier for him. I ask directly now when I need something. I say no when I can't or won't. I do not apologize for having needs that require a 40-minute drive. He's adjusting. It's uncomfortable for him. I think that's probably appropriate. Last month I went to Lily's school play. She played a turnip in a vegetable-themed adaptation of a fairy tale, a role she performed with tremendous commitment and zero self-consciousness. And afterward she ran across the gymnasium in her green felt costume and threw her arms around my waist and said, "Grandma, did you see me? Did you see when I did the spin?" I told her I saw every second of it. On the drive home, I thought about what Portia the nurse had said when I was leaving St. Augustine. She'd pressed the discharge folder into Griffin's hands and then turned to me and said, almost as an aside, "You've got a good one here." I thought she meant a good ride home. I think possibly she meant something larger. I'm 63 years old. I taught other people's children for 38 years. I raised a son. I loved a husband and lost him. I've been lonely in the particular way that people are lonely when they're surrounded by people who are too busy to notice. And I drove home from a hospital in Columbus on a Friday afternoon in a car that smelled like deli sandwiches, talking about books, feeling, for the first time in longer than I want to count, like someone who gets to have a story of her own. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, practical way you think about things when you're 63 and you've had enough time to watch how choices actually play out. Nathan didn't pick me up that Friday because somewhere along the way he learned that I would handle it. That I always handle it. Every time I smoothed things over, every time I said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. Every time I arranged my needs around his schedule and thanked him for whatever piece of attention he offered, I was teaching him something. I was teaching him that I didn't require much, that I was low maintenance, that my emergencies were negotiable. I don't say that to excuse what he did. What he did was wrong, and he knows it, and we both know he knows it. But I've lived long enough to understand that people don't just become who they are randomly. We shape each other slowly through 1,000 small moments that don't feel like decisions at the time but absolutely are. I shaped that. Partly. And recognizing that isn't about blame, mine or his. It's about deciding what I'm willing to keep teaching. What I know about Griffin is that his mother raised him to show up. That's it. That's the whole thing. Frances Alderman showed up for her students, for her son, for the people in her orbit who needed something. And she did it without requiring that they deserve it first, without calculating what she'd get in return. And 31 years later, her son drove to Columbus on a Friday afternoon for a woman he barely knew, because that was simply what you did when someone needed help. That's not luck. That's the long result of a choice she made, repeated daily, until it became who he was. I think about that when I look at Lily, 8 years old, with her 2 missing front teeth and her absolute commitment to that turnip roll. She didn't learn to send me that voice memo by accident. Someone, something, in her world still has that intact, that instinct to reach towards someone who might need to hear a kind word before surgery. I want to protect that in her. I want to make sure that whatever she inherits from this family, whatever gets passed down, includes the understanding that you show up for people, that it costs you something real and you do it anyway. That's why I adjusted my will the way I did. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I spent 8 years after Ray died trying to earn my place in my own family, and I am done earning what should have been unconditional. What I have left, I want to go somewhere. It will do something good. The hard thing about getting older is that you stop being able to pretend you have infinite time to wait for people to become who you need them to be. Nathan may get there. I believe he's trying, but I can't put my life in a holding pattern while he figures it out. I have Thursday dinners and a cat who destroys houseplants and a man who asks me what I think about Marilyn Robinson, and that is a real and present life that I am choosing actively every day. I think that's what nobody tells you about resilience. It's not about surviving the hard thing. It's about deciding after the hard thing that you still deserve something good, and then going and actually getting it without waiting for permission from anyone. I texted a near stranger from a hospital bed. That took more courage than I want to admit, but I did it, and here I am.